Well, let's go to our panel. Against the pipeline project is Rueben George. He's a First Nations chief in Vancouver and project manager for the Tsleil-Waututh Nation's Sacred Trust Initiative. And in favor of expanding the pipeline is Joe Dion in Calgary, Alberta. He's also a First Nations chief and the CEO of Frog Lake Energy Resource Corporation. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Rueben George, Lord George, let me begin with you. So it seems as if the court took Indigenous concerns seriously while the federal government did not. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, I believe all along I believed in the Canadian Constitution protecting our Indigenous rights. To date, we have about 250 legal victories around resource extraction projects, and that's over the last 3 years. So yeah, I'm pretty confident in that court, and we're ready. We were ready for Supreme Court, but historically, when it's a landslide victory like that, typically Supreme Court would not accept Canada's application to try to file against us. So it's a double victory.
And moving forward, do you think the federal government is going to think twice about the actual project? I mean, they don't seem to care because they just bought the pipeline from the oil company.
Well, what they don't talk about is Canada is one of the most sued countries in all of the world because of our NAFTA agreement. So they go ahead and they make deals like this, then they have to rescind the deals, then they'd be on the hook to pay it. So they'd be paying out about close to $2 billion anyway. So what they don't explain is that they would have been on the hook. So instead of being on the hook and paying them the money back for a bad decision that they made, they bought a pipeline that they couldn't sell. At the Kinder Morgan AGM, it was some of their meeting was leaked out to the public, and they said nobody would buy the pipeline, and they made Trudeau buy the pipeline. Right. So and I spoke at the Kinder Morgan AGM 3 years ago, and I spoke there a couple of times. But the first time I spoke there, I told them the true facts. I said this is a business choice that isn't right for you, and that the pipeline's not going to get built. Their stock fell by 60% 30 days after the day I spoke there. Their dividends were cut by 75% after the time I spoke there, and the shareholders had that. They could take their money out, but Trudeau's not giving the people the same choice. So it's sort of a sad situation for Canada that has not given them that choice. But we'll stop it.
So Joe, people like Rueben see this as a massive victory that the court said you did not take the concerns of the First Nations into account. This can't go forward unless you make major changes. But you think differently. Tell me why, Joe.
Let me begin by saying that I'm really happy that the Constitution prevailed. I was very much involved in the constitutional repatriation, and I was ahead of the lobby for the national organization at the time, the NIB, now AFN, where we got the Prime Minister and the premiers, and this is Prime Minister Trudeau himself, the father of the current Prime Minister, inserted Section 35(1) in the Constitution, which is the very section that's been used by First Nations across this land. And like Rueben George says, we're 254, in fact, even 264 in total now of legal wins by First Nations. So I'm glad and I'm happy that this is working. And for that matter, that this case was won by the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish and other First Nations who took this case on. But that being said, I think there's a need for this project. It's a national interest project. It's a project that we all need as Canadians, and I totally understand where Rueben is coming from. I've lived in the North Shore, and I know his parents. I knew his dad well, and his grandfather as well. So I sat across the water from where the terminal is with Chief Leonard George at the time, telling me that he didn't like that terminal there. So that's the issue here is the terminal location. And I agree that the location of the terminal is bad at this point. They need to find an alternative location. So with that, uh, we as a country and as First Nations as well, who are oil producers. We are shipping oil now by rail, and it's going to Portland, and we're shipping it to China. But that's it. But that's not. It's an unsafe way to move oil. So I am hoping that we as First Nations here can be a part of the solution. That we can own this pipeline is what we're seeking at this point in time. That and then we can work with First Nations like the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish solve this problem, because I think that's what needs to be done.
So, Rueben, jobs, economic growth, especially for the First Nations, if you get involved, if you're at the table, if you get to drive this process, wouldn't it be better than sitting back and it not happening at all and not having that economic bonanza?
I've been confident all along it's not going to happen. We did multiple studies. If you want to create jobs, there's going to be more stable jobs in a super Walmart than there is going to be in the pipeline. And the economics of it, you look at sacredtrust.com. We did so many studies. We did a 1,200-page assessment of the Kinder Morgan pipeline, explaining why it's not a good project. And we did additional studies. We did an economic study, an 80-page study that you could find on Sacred Trust, showing that it's not good for Tsleil-Waututh, it's not good for Canada, it's not good for the best interest of Canada. Harper did a study with his federal government about 4 years ago when he was in office, and they explained that they'll be obsolete in 10 years. It's a bad investment, just like the shareholders of Kinder Morgan pulled their money out. We did additional studies, 80-page studies, saying the likeliness of a spill is 87%. We did a study
Rueben,
that you could only clean up 20%.
And you are listing, a bunch of really strong counterpoints here to show that there's been huge skepticism from your end throughout, right? Now, the court hasn't said this thing is gone forever. It's basically told the federal government, given the federal government has bought it from Kinder Morgan now, so let's park them off. They're not a player here anymore. Let's look at the federal government. The court has essentially said, Rueben, come up with a better plan, and then we'll look at it. Is there any plan that you would accept? Is there any way this pipeline can go ahead, and any sort of scenario that you would accept where it is both kind to your needs, your environmental needs, and the fact that there'll still be an oil pipeline that will exist in some capacity? Rueben?
I just explained that it doesn't make economic sense. I just explained it's a huge risk that we won't take. We worked with world-renowned scientists. We work with world-renowned economists. But there's one pipeline I'd like, a geothermal pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Alternative energy. Joe Dixon, it's not going to happen, according to Rueben, according to very many people who have protested against this pipeline for years. They have the wind in their sails for the moment, even though Justin Trudeau and others have found it frustrating. They want to go ahead with it. Have you accepted, Joe, that you've lost?
I don't think it's a loss. I think it's a situation where we need to compromise as First Nations, as owners of the lands in BC, for example. There's a huge amount of First Nations along the pipeline route who support this pipeline, and Mr. George is aware of that. And we like we said, we totally respect what Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh and other folks are saying. So we need to find some way to get this done, because as I said earlier, there's thousands of jobs being lost here because we've had a huge oil slowdown in Alberta. We're losing billions in Canada. We're losing billions in Alberta. So it's been the oil industry is a huge job creation business, and it'll be here for a while. So we need we need the world markets, we need the Asian markets to make this happen. The USA is eating our lunch right now. We're having a $20 or $30 price differential, because we're landlocked. So yeah, so there's a current pipeline now, which is shipping 300,000 barrels a day. we think that, as I said earlier, we think Burnaby is the wrong place for the terminal. I think there's other places we can move it to, which would address the orca issues that the courts have said is the reason this has to be revisited and the First Nations accommodated.
What do you want the federal government to say, Rueben?
I want them to give up. You know what the breakdown is? The 35% tax would go to Alberta. 15% tax will go to Canada. Less than 2% would go to British Columbia. So we're taking all the risk with no benefits. That's part of the BC government's argument. And then First Nations, it's sad because they're a major shareholder, get next to nothing. And so all around it's a bad investment. No matter where you move the pipeline, we created something called the Sailor Sea Alliance. You know, he mentioned that there used to be 54. That's a Kinder Morgan and Canada claimed war agreement, but 10 nations dropped out. So there's less than 44 nations now that are signed, but we have 180. And then just in the Sailor Sea, there's 80 nations. In Washington, there's the affiliate tribes in the Northwest. That's Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana. They all send an MOI to support the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and not having this here. Cascadia, we're working with nations in California, Oregon, and California, and Washington, that are against this, and not just First Nations. I mean, political leaders from municipal, federal, and provincial governments that came up and got arrested, and over 220 people got arrested, like all walks of life people. You know, it was overwhelming in support when we had this victory of the calls and of people that we had from not just in Cascadia, not just Canada, but all over the world. People understand Canada's the third worst polluter in all of the world, and it's because of the tar sands, and we have to move in a direction that fits. And you know, we support business. To Tsleil-Waututh Nation, we're starting to grow success in business, and we have a referral system that's dealing with over 50 at any given moment, 50 referrals of people who want to build in our traditional territory that need to abide by our land codes and our policies and our laws, and we work really well with them. And Kinder Morgan in Canada didn't do that. They didn't take in consideration the environmental risks, the economic risks, and so that's why we sued them. And that's how we won, and we'll continue to win. Like I said, we're doing a health assessment as well right now, and we're also doing a air quality assessment. We're going to be more ready than we were before. We have more on board to win with the political support that we have. And I see Trudeau and Notley being really, really desperate and fighting for their political lives, but it's too late.
Right.
We told them that this would be an issue, and we said we could do this the hard way or the easy way, and they chose the hard way. Now it's the hard way or the harder way.
Right.
And we have more on line to win than we ever have.
Yeah. So Joe, you've been saying that First Nations need to compromise, but what we're hearing from Rueben is that they've crunched the numbers, they've looked deeply into this, and it's actually not that great for business anyway. And why not use the opportunity for renewables? Why not use the opportunity to be better?
We as an energy company are already diversifying to other forms of energy, wind, solar, cogeneration. We're doing that now. But the fact remains, the oil industry is still very much probably the largest driver, the largest economic driver in Canada.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got to move on, but it's been good learning from both of you. Good to get two First Nations perspectives on the issue. Rueben George and Joe Dion, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.